Hello, everyone. Welcome to the awesome day of FileMaker training here. This is day 3 of JavaScript for Claris FileMaker, everyone. Welcome to fmtrain.tv, where every day, Monday through Friday, unless it's a national holiday, we're doing FileMaker training at 1 o'clock Pacific time on Twitch, YouTube, and Discord. We're broadcasting in high definition on 3 different platforms because one platform is never enough. So today we have day 3. It's exciting because Leland Long has been killing it the first 2 days. So all this content is being recorded. If you want to find out more about this training course, what we're up to, you can see that this is the next, almost takes us through the end of next week. So this is week 1, next week is week 2. And then what ends up happening is that week 3 is available. So why is week 3 awesome and special? Because during week 3, we're going to be covering React Native, the idea that you take JavaScript skills in terms of developing and you apply them essentially loosely, kind of the idea of this platform. It's Facebook. Facebook created React Native, and it allows them to build executable applications for Android and iOS. And so you can use JavaScript to build an app for that. Then you use the FileMaker data API on the FileMaker server, right? Not Claris Cloud, please. Someone tried to do that the other day and it already blew up. And so what ends up happening is that you can access the data backend from the front end with iOS and Android. And that's what you're going to learn on week 3. So it's very valuable. So that is a paid part of the training, week 3. If you want to do that, you'll get a link and an invite to Zoom. We've had a number of people buy it already. We greatly appreciate your support. Buying the training from Leland helps Leland decide that he's going to invest more time and provide more training in the future. I think those of you who've watched day 1 and day 2 realize there is high value in what he's doing. If you're already a JavaScript expert and you're like that good, then you don't have to worry about the training. But the rest of us who are not JavaScript gods need all the help we can get. So I'm going to press this button here. I've not pressed this button yet to see what happens. If we press the button, you'll see day 1, day 2. So this is where you could buy the paid training here. If you want to buy it here, you'll get a license key, and then that will turn on the paid recordings when that pops up. So that's it for now. So if you go to fmtrain.tv, once again, press the button. This is the website. The live training is here. It's the upcoming live events. But if you want to see more about the JavaScript training, you press that button right there. Cool. All right. So Leland Long, are you there? Are you there somewhere?
I'm here. Let me find my share screen button. Good to go, right?
Oh, you are set. So welcome to day 3. So once again, we have a specific list of things to get through between today and tomorrow. So if we have to go longer, we will today. So we don't really have a specific stop time, but Leland does have some content we need to get through. So
a little minor recap. Yesterday, we started the boring bookwork stuff, right? Started trying to understand some of the rules and syntax that JavaScript has. And what I didn't mention is, why do we want to learn it all? Well, one of the things I think you'll see by the end of today or by the end of tomorrow is you're going to be looking at some JavaScript code. And back on Tuesday, when you first started watching this series, if you would have seen that JavaScript, you would have ran in fear, right? And you would have looked at it and it would look kind of like it would looking at a foreign language that you don't read or write or speak. So by the end of all of this kind of unimportant yet important bookwork type stuff to delve through, by the end of the week, you'll be looking at some JavaScript code and suddenly accidentally you'll notice, hey, that's actually understandable. I kind of get it now. And that doesn't mean you can sit down and start writing JavaScript, but what it means is that you're starting to get familiar with the concepts, understanding the syntax, and suddenly what looked like a foreign language is starting to kind of make sense. And so that's why we have to go through some of this boring stuff. So yesterday we looked at script tags, we looked at functions, we looked at anonymous functions, we explored 5 different ways of having output from JavaScript so that we could see something. And then we were partway through statements, keywords. No, I think we totally got past that. That was code blocks, white space, semicolons, all those fun definitions. And we started on syntax. We had literals, variables, operators, and we stopped at comments.
Okay,
so that's where we will start today.
We are getting people who ask the question every day. And so I guess we should just say, so let me say this, that yes, it's recorded. The content's recorded, 1. 2, the recordings will become available. 3, the third most common question, Leland, is what are you using to code your JavaScript? Okay. What application are you using? And is it Mac only? And why do you hate Windows? And why does Windows suck so much? And why does Claris hate me? And so those are all the questions that we normally get. So if you'd like to just deal with those up front.
Okay, let me start with everything you've seen up until now. My JavaScript code writing platform of choice is the FileMaker insert text script step. Right there, hand typed. Type away anything you want, and it works lovely. My
Okay.
second choice would be for small code snippets, would be TextEdit, a basic text editor where you can type in some text and you can quickly Command A to select, Command C to copy, jump over here to FileMaker's insert and paste. So I've done that a lot. Matter of fact, that's what I do a lot of designing things, even like Pac-Man with 2,500 lines of code, is copy and paste between FileMaker. Now, is there better ways? Probably. If you go out and take a look at Jeremy Brown, plug for you, sir. You have a nice web page set of description and instructions out there of how to create a Visual Studio Code to FileMaker work environment to develop JavaScript code easier. So I would recommend people search that out and look for it if they're interested in exploring what that is.
Visual
To me, that
is another one.
Yes.
Visual Studio. Okay.
Yeah, that'll be next. What Jeremy's done is something that I consider to be fairly advanced, and this class is JavaScript 102, 103, and 101, 102, 103 for the first 2 weeks. And to me, this is beginner level. I don't want to introduce any sort of complication that involves things that can break, not work correctly, and end up with nothing but frustration from somebody that's just trying to start learning JavaScript. So for this week, we are staying purely within the FileMaker world. What you've seen in the background that we've been talking about is Visual Studio Code. That's where you've seen this example code. This is free from Microsoft. You can download it for both platforms, Windows and Mac. And again, it's a code environment that does things like pretty things up with colors for you. It gives you some type ahead functionality. So if I hit return a few times here and I start to type in something, I get a pop-up list of things that it thinks that I might be wanting to actually put in, just exactly like FileMaker's script workspace, right? Same concept. So from here, I can quickly push things over to GitHub because I have everything all coordinated here. So there's a lot of extra things that are tools that will help you develop, but they're not necessary. They're not really a requirement. They're just a personal choice. And there's lots of those code editors out there. Atom is one that's no longer supported, but it's still out there. GitHub made that. You have TextEdit, you have BB Edit Lite. I don't know. There's a slew of things out there. You could even write JavaScript and Xcode if you have that, I believe. You can't compile it and run it, but you can at least write it and it'll indent things for you and colorize it and do all that fun stuff. So there's a lot of personal choice. But for this week, we are using nothing but FileMaker. Just this dialogue right here that we get for free with FileMaker. You can type in it whatever you want. Now, what I've done is I've hand typed some spaces in here for indentation. It does not do it for me, right? So any indentation you see inside of here, which is me typing in some spaces just to indent it the way that I wanted it to. That's optional, as we saw yesterday, as far as what's required and what is not. Extra spaces is ignored by the compiler. You can do it to your heart's content. Ready to move on?
Yep, you're good. Keep going.
Excellent. We will start off with where we left off yesterday, which was comments. So it might seem kind of obvious, but just kind of a general statement. Not all JavaScript statements are executed. If you put double slashes in front of it or in group several lines of code with a slash asterisk and end it with an asterisk slash, it treats all of that as a comment. Comments are ignored, will not be executed. Anybody that's written any sort of comment inside of a FileMaker calc dialog is well familiar with that concept. It's exactly the same in FileMaker. Hopefully we won't have too many questions in that end. Oh, I suppose something I could point out that may or may not be obvious. You can have comments that take up an entire line, an entire set of lines, or you can add a comment to the end of some actual code. So that is optional.
And then once again, that's
a few
consistent with what FileMaker does. So
yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And last on this particular section is what we call identifiers. Those are JavaScript names. Those are things like creating names of variables, names of functions, using keywords. The rules are pretty much the same for most programming languages, including FileMaker, which is in FileMaker, you have to start a variable with a $sign or a double $sign. In JavaScript, it's optional. it does not mean a variable like it does in FileMaker. It's just a valid character to begin your script name with. I would recommend for FileMaker developers that they do not get in that habit, because then you have confusion when you're dealing with FileMaker code and JavaScript code. You're going to see a $sign and you're going to think one thing in your mind, and it ain't going to work that way. So my recommendation is start with a lowercase letter. After that, optionally use all of these possibilities. Okay. So identifiers, one thing to keep in mind, same thing in FileMaker. JavaScript identifiers are case sensitive. So in this example, last name and last name, they look the same, but they are two different variables. And that's a good gotcha when you're looking at debugging your code. That's a common thing to trip up on for sure. And for some of you that might be wanting to know this kind of information, JavaScript uses Unicode character set. So with that, if we don't have any more questions on syntax, we will move on.
It's kind of quiet right now. Everyone's still kind of getting into.
Yeah, this is kind of the boring stuff. So it's kind of like, you're kind of half paying attention, right? And that's when you're hoping that the teacher doesn't have a test later, right? That you missed because you were busy yawning, daydreaming of what the show was you watched last night. Yeah. So this section is on scope, and I'm going to tell you right now, we are not going to go through it. It's dry, dry, dry. Even if you pour water all over your screen, it's still going to be dry as a bread, as a sponge, as a slice of bread. So one thing I will just say is that because you're assumably FileMaker developers with some skill in writing scripts, you already understand scope to some degree, because you know already that a variable inside of a script is not accessible outside that script.
Yeah.
Right. That's scope.
Yeah. Let me just say though, a lot of times we use the word context. The word scope, I think, is more of a programming industry term, I think, right? When you say that, Leland, it's
for me, context is things like a layout.
Okay. Well, it's
and a window,
layout, found set, table, thing like
found
that.
set. Yep. Yeah. That to me is context, where in the variable world in scripts, I use scope, but I understand where you're going.
Yeah, it's basically the idea of where it's applicable. So the word scope and context is what we're trying to do is imply that there's rules about applicability, right? So I'll let you continue with that, but that's I'm just going to point that out.
Okay. So this is in your demo file for you to look at, to use as reference if you're interested. There's some interesting technicalities on scope when it comes to variables in JavaScript. But for JavaScript 101, if you just keep in mind that a function is like a script, and if you define a variable inside that script, the scope is that function, you'll be safe. You'll have the basic concept down. And there's more to learn on that, but we're not going to get too deep in that on this.
So if you define a variable inside a function and you have two functions on that page, the other function won't see variable.
Right. And there's some exceptions to that rule, but yeah, try not to dive too deep into the exceptions. I mean, as long as you're doing, the var right here, like here on the screen, if you're doing a var x equals 2, then your scope is going to be safe. There's not too much more on that. We will move on to operators, because we've got some interesting things here in operators. Some of it will look very familiar to you. Let's start at the top. The assignment operator is the equal sign. It assigns a value to a variable. You've seen it before in many of my examples. There it is underneath the mouse cursor. This says, hey, assign the value 10 to the variable x. Okay. So there's some exceptions we'll get down here in the page as far as that equal sign of how it works. But in JavaScript, that means assignment. So just bear that in mind and hold the questions. Addition is plus, subtraction is minus, multiplication, exponentiation. That's kind of an interesting one, right? I've never used it, but if you need to use it, now you notice there is an ES clause there, so it may or may not work. So if you're dealing with exponentiation, I don't even think I could say it. Exponent, yikes. That's a wild word. I can usually pronounce most English words.
Exponents is what they are, exponents, right?
Yeah, it's exponents, thank you. And division. And the last three are a little bit more confusing. If you've ever used modulus, which is the division remainder, I'm not sure what it is in FileMaker. I think it's just MOD. I think it's a function.
Yeah.
You can use the MOD function, right, for mod. And I've used that occasionally, and that gives you the remainder of some division. In JavaScript, it's the percent sign. But these two are unique. You don't see these in FileMaker. And so we'll explain those a little bit. And 2 pluses in a row means increment, 2 minuses in a row means decrement. And we'll look at some examples a little later. The addition assignment operator is a plus equals. And this one's interesting. You've actually done this in FileMaker, I'm sure. If you've dealt with loops, You've already done this, but you've done it in a way that just looks different. In this example, you're creating a variable called x. You're assigning it the value 10, but this next line says x plus equals 5. You can probably guess what x equals now after that step, right? 15. So in FileMaker, what you would do is you would set a variable $x, and in the value, you would say $x plus 5. Same exact thing. It just looked a heck of a lot different.
So
right?
x
Any
plus
questions?
x equals x plus 5.
X plus 5. Yep.
Yeah, that's kind of I don't know if that's normal in other programming, but I don't think they did that in Fortran that way, other things. But yeah, it shows you how old I am if I'm talking about Fortran.
Yeah, you definitely you definitely always need to do it in a language, right? It just question is how it looks,
It's a syntax.
what the syntax is.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So a few more examples. A straight operator. Here's a couple examples. Same as x equals y, and plus equals. We just covered that. So in this example, x plus equals y really means this, right? So this really helps explain visually what each one synonyms, right? Well, they're both equal to each other. Go ahead.
Write it this way on the right. Can you write it that way? And just because you're trying to be consistent, or will JavaScript freak out if it sees this?
Both of them are totally the same thing. You can do either one.
Okay. Good.
Yeah. Right. So you can do it the old-fashioned way and do it this way, or you can do it this way. Which any sort of code you're going to see out there on the web that's JavaScript, they're going to use this one.
Okay.
Right. So mostly it's, I suppose you could say, best practice to use the center column, and the right side column is totally acceptable. You're not going to break anything. Is that a fair way to say it?
Sure. Yeah. No, it's just a matter of if I jump from language or to language to language to language, I try to keep as many things consistent in my head as possible. Right. So, but yeah.
Okay. Totally fair. Yeah. Strings. We deal with these all the time in FileMaker, right? How do you concatenate things in FileMaker? You use the ampersand, right? Well, in JavaScript, it's a plus sign. So in this example, text1 variable equals John, text2 equals Doe. To concatenate both of them together, it's text1 plus space plus text2. So that would look exactly the same in FileMaker if you replace the plus signs with the ampersand. Pretty straightforward.
Yep. And
you can do the same thing with plus equals. So you can have what a vary space and add nice data to the end of it. Concatenate variables together that are strings. So a little different than FileMaker, but not too overly complicated because you've probably already done the same type of thing. So this is just doing the same thing with a different syntax. Next up, comparison. This is where it gets interesting. This is where the whole equal sign really differs between FileMaker and JavaScript. So if you've been going potty and getting a cup of coffee and kind of watching the screen and listening and just half paying attention, this is the time to really pay attention, because this is probably your number one biggest trip up when it comes to beginners writing in JavaScript, is things like if then, right? We're going to be doing a lot of that here shortly. If statements are very, very common, and this is very different than FileMaker. So pay attention. In FileMaker, we would use a single equal sign if we had an if statement that says, if x equals 1, then do something, right? But in FileMaker, in JavaScript, the single equal sign is an assignment operator. It's not comparing it. So you're not comparing x to 1. You're assigning 1 to x. And that's going to result in true, because unless there's a failure, unless it was a constant, it's going to be able to assign 1 to x, and so that's going to evaluate to true. And your if statement's going to fail, and you're not going to know why. So what you would do in that case in JavaScript is you would use two equal signs. If x equal to 1, then do something. That's the most complicated thing here. Everything else is just expounding on that. So as long as you get that concept and remember it, you'll do fine. So if that's the worst case, we're doing pretty good, I think. Right. So that would be the one thing on the test. How do you write if x equals 1 in JavaScript versus FileMaker? There you go. It's two equal signs. Now, sometimes you'll see 3. What the heck? What the heck is 3 equal signs mean? That allows you to do something that I don't think FileMaker allows you to do, and it tries to do it for you, which is it tries to compare the type. Is it a type? Is it a string? Is it a number? Is it a float? What is it? Types we'll get into here in a minute. And so the 3 equal signs is saying, hey, if you have a string that has the number 1 in it, and you ask in an if statement, if x equals double quote 1, if you do 2 equal signs, it's going to be yes if it evaluates to 1, but it'll fail on 3 equal signs if you were asking if it's a 1 numerical or a 1 string. So I said that kind of poorly. I apologize.
Let me help.
And I don't want to dive too deep into it.
Yeah, I don't want to. Let me just see if I can do this in like 30 seconds. So in FileMaker, when you define a variable, it's FileMaker. You don't say, here's a variable and it's a text type or a number type or a container or something like that. FileMaker tries to guess based upon what you're setting in there as to what the type is. That it's called casting, as in like you're casting a mold, right? That's the idea. And for advanced developers in FileMaker, say you cast something, you meant it to be a string, but you put 5/1/23. May 1, for me, it'd be May 1, 2023. And so FileMaker would see that and go, oh, this variable is going to be a date type, okay? But if you didn't really mean it for it to be a date type, and then you put some other data in that later on, you could get improper results or unexpected results out of calculations because it cast it invisibly. You can't see the casting, right? It's completely invisible. It cast it incorrectly. And so if you're an advanced FileMaker developer like the Kyle Williams of the world or people like that, they run into this. They know to set that variable correctly with a relevant piece of data on the front end because FileMaker automates it for you. Here we're saying, is the value the same, and are the 2 items the same cast? Basically, they're both numbers or both strings or whatever the type is, right? Does that make sense for some of you who are intermediate to senior people that, how come you don't set the type of variable in FileMaker? Because FileMaker guesses for you intelligently, and 99% of the time it's accurate, and then that 1% of the time you'll be pulling your hair out. So
well said. Moving on. So for JavaScript 101, you won't use that a lot. For more advanced JavaScript work, you might start to figure out whether or not you want to use 2 equal signs or 3, but we'll just kind of leave it at that and move on. Now in FileMaker, you can have a binary not or an invert by using the keyword not, right? So you can put if not is empty. Everybody's done that, right? So in JavaScript, you don't have the word not in this case, you have an exclamation point. So wherever you see an exclamation point, it basically means the inverse of. So this is saying the inverse is equal. So in this case, not equal. And you have the same thing with multiple equal signs to have the type comparison. Greater than and less than is identical, and greater than or equal to and less than or equal to is identical to FileMaker. So those you should be totally comfortable with. This last one I will just mention. I will not go into very deep. The ternary operator, I use this a lot in advanced JavaScript. Took me a while to wrap my head around it. We won't cover it here, but basically it's kind of an ES6 option to allow you to really shorten up your if-then statements. So we'll just kind of leave it at that and not even delve into its use. But when you just see some code out there that has a question mark sitting there, it is not synonymous with FileMaker's question mark, which means it didn't know what you meant or what you did or what it got, or the field's too small and it can't show that entire number. Yeah, that's FileMaker's unique proprietary use of a question mark. That is not what's happening if you see it in JavaScript. Last but not least, logical operators. We already kind of mentioned it a little bit. I guess I better scroll first before I make the screen bigger. There we go. In FileMaker, this one here, you use the keyword and. This one here in FileMaker, you use the keyword or. And in FileMaker, you use the keyword not here. So anytime you've done an if statement or anything in the calc engine, a let statement, a case statement, whatever, when you're comparing something with something and you want it to be and or not, this is what you see in JavaScript instead. 2 ampersands, 2 bar characters, which if you're not familiar with what that is your shift backspace. Should be between your return and delete keys.
What'd you call those again? The 2?
I call it a bar.
Okay, I keep hearing,
I don't know if that's
I hear
accurate.
vertical pipes. I've heard people say vertical.
There we go. Pipe character. I like that one better.
Yeah.
I used to use that a lot. I don't know why I called it bar. Maybe I'm thirsty. I don't know. Exclamation point for the word not. So we won't spend too much time on those, but at least we will definitely point them out when we look at real live examples when using them in the real world. How's that? Is that fair?
Yep.
The next one I told you we would cover, and it's short and sweet, and it's data types. So we have the strings.
Okay, here we go. Yeah.
Yeah, we have the strings. We have the numbers. JavaScript gives you the option of a big int, a big integer. You can see an example there of a very large one. 99% of our audience is probably not going to use that, but it's at least there to let you know that it's there. If you want to use it, you can go research it and figure out how to use it and all the ins and outs and gotchas and all that.
So I'm assuming a number.
Boolean,
I'm assuming a number has a limit to it, right? Is that what we're saying? So the number has a limit, so we have big integer when we need a big one.
Yeah, with today's 64-bit architecture, I wouldn't be surprised if a maximum and minimum value for a number is probably bigger than what it used to be when we had 8-bit systems, right?
Yeah.
Unless that carried over. I'm not sure. I'm not up on that sort of thing, but yeah. Most of the time for the numbers we use, if you're using something in the lines of a trillion or less, I'm sure you're safe.
Yeah.
So Boolean, we're all pretty familiar with, true, false. Undefined and null are complicated topics, but here's an example. If you say let car with no value, then at this point, the value is undefined and the type is undefined. So it will be determined later at runtime as you start to use that variable car. Suddenly the value will be defined and the type will be defined as a result. So undefined is what you get initially. Null is much more of an advanced topic. I only go out there and try to research exactly what I'm looking for, and you don't need to understand null too very often, but it exists. So just understand it is one of the 8 data types.
Yeah, we bring it up here. I'm not sure how it is the data type. The null, in a lot of cases, for a lot of people, from a simplistic perspective, is 0, but it's technically it's the vacuum of space is the best way to explain it. It's not really even a 0, it's absolute nothingness. Now, I'm not sure how you have a data type that's null. I mean, you could have a value that's null, right?
The symbol and object type we will cover. As a matter of fact, we'll cover object here in a second. Symbol is another one of the 8 that's out there, but never used, and let you explore it at your own volition. The object data type, though, it is very important. It's used a lot in JavaScript, and you actually use it a lot as long as you've been using JSON within FileMaker. Objects are becoming more and more common in the FileMaker world for sure. And JSON, in case for any of you that are unaware, is an acronym for JavaScript object notation. So an object is a native data type within the language, and it's used a lot. And now FileMaker can read and write objects as well. Some of the syntax looks slightly different, and that's what I want to cover here. In JavaScript itself, an object in the raw looks exactly like this, and it should look familiar to you. It's very similar to JSON with one exception. The key value pairs, the key does not have to have double quotes around it. That's about the only exception. So you still have key value pairs separated with colons. Both key value pairs are separated with the comma, and the object beginning and ending is the curly brace. And an array is right below it, and that's where you have your square brackets. So this is an array with 3 objects in it. And the one thing to note, if you don't know it already, arrays in JavaScript are 0 index. Arrays in FileMaker are 1 index. So there is a little bit of confusion inherent there, but once you're aware of it, it's easy to recognize it and deal with it. But just be aware that in JavaScript, accessing this object within the array is index 0. This is index 1. This is index 2. So there's 3 items in there, but with a 0 type index, it begins at 0 and not 1. If you were looping through this in FileMaker, you would do this as get object 1, get object 2, get object 3, for instance.
Yeah, I think in your case, you're absolutely correct. And some things in FileMaker, they do start at 0. And I don't know if there's a consistent logic to why they did it that way, other than it was developed by probably 100 engineers over 30 some odd years, and it's kind of grown.
You know, I've had that question myself, and I came up with an answer. You tell me if you agree with me. I think the reason is because FileMaker was designed from day one to not be an engineering tool. It was
Yeah,
meant
but I
for
mean, but even
non-engineers.
I understand. Well, they still say that right now, right? I mean,
Yeah, and so
you know,
because of that, a zero index doesn't make much sense to a non-engineer.
Hey,
How do I address
you.
something with a zero?
It's for low code, no code, not pro code.
right. So that's that conversation. Back to
Right.
if you're a professional coder, then you'd want it consistent with zero. But
Yeah.
if you go function to function year over year, it's either 0 or 1. And half the time when you take the certification test, they're trying to trip you on the fact that you know this.
Okay, the third example down there, a date object type in JavaScript. That's what it would look like. You're setting a variable called date, and you want a new date. And here's how you would do that. It's actually a function called date. It's going to create a new object of type date, and here's the parameter you're going to pass in order to generate that to be equal to March 25th, 2022. So again, this is just an introduction. We won't spend too much time delving into all the options and all the different variations on a rule, but in general, as an initial exposure to the concept of an object, an array, and a date, we'll leave it at that with one exception. I just thought of something I blew past. An array. I told you that FileMaker has arrays. It does and it doesn't. You will probably not find the word array anywhere in FileMaker documentation anywhere. Am I wrong, Richard?
You know, I normally say the word array, but it's only people understand what I'm saying are either people with a math background or a physical sciences background, like engineering or chemistry. So, arrays for us is normal, right? Like a repeating field is a one-dimensional array, right?
Yes,
but for the rest
right.
of humans, it's like this weird list of that doesn't follow any rules. So, yeah. So, yeah, I don't think they use the word
So
array
in-
generally.
FileMaker help and nothing came up.
Okay, yeah, correct.
Oh, good call. Good call.
Yeah, just do it that way. Yeah.
So if you want to access a value of a specific repeating field, you have to use a square bracket to do so, right? So if you have a repeating field on your screen that has 5 boxes, if you want to access the contents of the second one, you have to put the name of the field, and in square brackets, you put the number 2, right? And again, that's a one indexed array. It starts at 1. It doesn't start at 0. So in JavaScript, it starts at 0. In FileMaker, it starts at 1. So a little bit of confusion there, but a repeating field does give you a sense of how an array operates as far as when you're trying to write calculations and stuff using repeating fields. So if you've done that, you're already familiar with arrays and the concept of it. All right. So with that, I will congratulate you all. We've reached the bottom of what I consider to be the most boring part of this entire JavaScript 101. From here on out, I hope it gets a little bit more exciting from you. And our very next section, everything we're going to do in the next 6 sections.
Before you hop on to the next section, I have a question.
Put on the brakes. Okay, go ahead.
Basically, someone wants to know what the exact difference is between a null and an empty string.
I don't.
I would almost say that a null would be equal to no double quotes of an empty string. How's that? Try to chew on that for a while. A double quote with nothing in it would be a string, but no double quotes would be a null. There's your difference. As far as trying to put that into words, good luck. I don't know. I'll let the math.
That's why I use the word vacuum of space, right?
Yeah, vacuum. That's good. A vacuum. Yeah.
The vacuum of space could be, in a lot of cases, it could be 0. So you'll see a null sometimes represented as 0, but a lot of times, if you're really being technical about it and you're really getting in the weeds, it's beyond a 0. It's not, because 0 is a real thing, right? So
0 is a number. Yeah. Or a Boolean even. So to have a null equal to a Boolean equal to a number, yeah, that's totally invalid. So what you're hearing is us even trying to describe, even in visual terms or verbal terms, something that's a very complex topic. So that's a pretty intellectual concept. Yeah. Definitely not something that JavaScript 101 students need to even concern themselves with. So with that, let's move on to stuff that's a little bit more fun. And everything you see from here on out is all going to have some comparisons between the JavaScript version and the FileMaker version. And we're going to start with our favorite if, else, if. Everybody in this class should have used this at least once in their experience.
Yeah,
If not,
everyone here
I
should
would be
be
very
an
surprised.
intermediate developer and with at least 1 to 3 years of development. So they should be able to do this stuff here at the top all day, no problem.
Matter of fact, since we have a bunch of white space here, let me see if I can increase this just a little
There
bit
you
more.
go.
Look at that.
See that?
Beautiful.
There you go.
Good.
Right.
All right. So the top portion there is an example of a FileMaker Calc Engine version of an if statement. And that's what it would look like in FileMaker, right?
Yep.
I mean, you can get rid of the greeting equal at the front. I mean, probably that would be your set variable $ greeting would be the variable name, and then the if statement minus the equal sign would be the value, right? This would be something very common in FileMaker. Okay. And as you know, just by looking at that, anybody that can read an if statement would know that if the hour is 10, the result's going to be good day. And if hour is 20, it's going to be, the value is going to be not such a good day, right?
Okay.
Should be strikingly obvious. Down below is the JavaScript version of the exact same thing.
Are the
So
carriage
if you just take a minute to look at that.
are the carriage returns required here, or are they just helpful?
Returns and spaces are optional. This is readability.
Okay.
And if you were to type this in a tool such as Visual Studio Code, it would do the indenting and the reach and the lines for you. And if it's short enough, you'll see it all on one line instead of 4, 5.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Good questions. Now, as you know from our previous discussion, a code block is determined by a curly braces, right? So this code block here is what runs if it's true. And if you just ended it there with no else, which is valid, it would just not do anything if it wasn't true. But if we introduce an else, which is optional, it's not required, then you can have a code block in curly braces of what you want it to do if the comparison is false. Okay, now on Discord, Andy just used the tertiary, the question mark, and we weren't going to cover that because that's ES6. It does not work in FileMaker. I use it all the time in React Native. But again, yes, you can write things many different ways, but if he tries that tertiary in FileMaker's JavaScript, it's going to fail. So that's true and accurate, Andy, but it's not fair for FileMaker developers in JavaScript 101 because it ain't going to work. They're going to try that, it's going to fail, and suddenly your credibility goes out the window. So just a word of caution there. All right, so back to the class here. Hopefully the way that I've written this is completely understandable, right? But we have a few buttons. Let's have some playtime. Okay, we got a text field down here. We're going to pass the value of this text field in place of this 18, or in case of this hour variable. So let's put in a number. Richard, give me a number from 1 to 50.
32.
32. Okay, so I'm going to init our web viewer, which is going to populate our JavaScript. We're not going to see anything, right? Okay. And we have 32 in our text field. Let's run our script.
Not such a good day.
Okay.
Okay. Now we all heard that, right?
Yep.
Okay, so we're having a little fun with the text to speech. We're doing some JavaScript. And we just had this function in there, and because it was greater than 18, it did not pass. So it ran the else function, right? So now let's look at scripts and let's see what we actually did here. So here's our basic script that all of us that have been taking this class should be familiar with. We're setting a variable called HTML. We're populating it to our web viewer. And
I have a question. Do you have can you do me a favor and press that up there for us? I know it'll throw the lines off a little bit, but there we go. Make things bigger for people. That's a monkey bread.
Okay, I've never used it.
Yeah, it throws the lines off, so just don't pay attention to the lines.
It does.
So Christian,
Sure does.
yeah, but other than that, it makes the text readable for people who are getting old and grumpy. So there you go.
Well, here's my only argument is that we never look at stuff here in this view, right? I'm always going into this screen, and that doesn't work here. Yeah. So here's our script. Everything outside of this highlighted section is our placeholder text we've been using all the time, with the only exception being we usually have a div inside of our body with some sort of ID. In this case, we've called it result. Now let's look at our script. And now our script, as we look through this, like I preached at the beginning of this session, this stuff should be beginning to look familiar and not quite so scary, right? 2 days ago, this would have made everybody run out the door screaming because, oh my gosh, it's something brand new and it looks really cryptic. And how am I ever going to learn this stuff? Well, you are. Slowly but surely, you're getting more comfortable with it. For instance, let's start here. We've created a function in our JavaScript and we've called it if else. We're passing in a parameter, hour. How are we going to get that parameter? We're going to run a FileMaker script, right? The run button that we click. We're going to run it. It's going to call this function if else from within FileMaker. And we're going to pass it a parameter. We're going to pass it the contents of that field that's on the screen, right? So here's how it comes in. When it comes in, what are we calling it? It's called hour. So it creates a variable called hour, and we have access to it. What's the scope? The scope of that hour variable is this entire code block, this function. So everywhere inside of here, this variable called hour is going to exist. So there's our scope.
But then we're also defining this and
Now you're getting ahead of us.
oh, I'm sorry, I'm just
The
trying
next two lines.
yeah.
The next two lines, we're creating two new variables.
Yeah.
And those variables, the script for those variables are going to be inside this code block from this curly brace to that curly brace. So within this function, these three variables are going to live just exactly like single $sign variables inside your script.
Right.
Okay. So the first one we're going to call greeting, and equals means what? That means we're assigning a variable, right? That's our assignment operator. We just learned that today. So we're creating a variable called greeting. We're assigning it what? Something we've seen before,
Yeah.
which is the funky code to create a speech synthesis utterance object.
Okay.
Okay. And we're going to use that later to speak something. And if you look that up on the web, you'll find the particulars as far as what that's compatible with and all the different things you can do with it. So there's probably some configuration options that I have not explored yet, but you can Google that and start to figure out how to configure it if you wish. All right. Beyond the scope of this class. There, I just used the word scope again. Another variable called rdiv, and what we're doing, we've done before, we are using the HTML method get element by ID, passing it in the name of our ID, which is right here, and we're going to get back that div, and we're going to store it inside this variable called our div, and that's going to be an object. That's the data type. It's an object. Okay. Then we start our if else statement, which is brand new to us. And here we're doing the same thing we did before. If that hour variable is less than 18, it's going to do this. Else, it's going to do this. What is it we're doing? We're changing the text value, not the inner HTML this time. There's a different method called .text within that element, and we're setting it just to text. Good day. No HTML code. You can't shove HTML in there. It's just the text value. So we're going to shove in there good day, or we're going to shove in there not such a good day. So that's what this if statement.
Okay, I have a question. I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay. This is kind of a fundamental. So normally in my world, even in other languages, you define a variable, and at the time you define it as a type. So we would say like greeting.text or greeting.number, big integer, whatever, right? But you don't specify what it is right here. But down here in the code, then you're kind of saying, well, here's the variable, and then, oh, by the way, now it's text. It's like you're defining the type after the fact. Because this happens first, then this happens, and I'm wondering why the hell we didn't specify the type at the top. Sorry.
Okay, those are good questions, and they're actually two different questions. I don't know if you caught that.
No,
and let me explain why they're two.
I'm a student today. I'm not the teacher, so I'm barely keeping up.
Okay. So to answer your question as far as type goes, this incoming parameter right here is not defined. We don't know what type it is, right? So
No.
just like FileMaker, JavaScript's going to figure it out based upon what we pass to it.
Okay.
And we're always going to, FileMaker always passes a string, right? There's no exception. I don't think you can pass anything but a string from FileMaker to JavaScript.
Yeah. No, I understand that in terms of these two things talking to each other.
Right. And so if down here in your JavaScript code, you want to do something other than a string, you actually have to convert it because FileMaker always passes a string, even if you pass a number.
Okay, back up. So was string, without me going back to your list, was string one of your approved JavaScript types? I guess it was, right?
Yeah, that was the first one.
Okay, what's the difference between a string and text?
Oh, nothing. Same. This .text is not a type. That's a method. I think that's where you're getting a little confused.
That's okay. I'm assuming that you're specifying it. Okay.
Yeah, the .text means I've got an object called greeting. It better have a method called text, or this is going to generate an error.
Okay.
Because that's not me making something up. That's saying I want you to define the value of this
I
text
thought you were. I thought I
variable
realized that
inside
was
this
a
object.
method. Okay, got it. Cool. Anyone else having
Right.
this question
Yeah.
besides me? I mean, I know the really smart people already understand this, but I don't code this stuff all day every day. So
So
Sounds-
what we didn't do, and we didn't spend too much time doing, but we will do later, is if you go look up this function name on the web, it will give you a list of all of its properties, methods, everything, and you will see that a text variable is part of that object. So we only know that based upon documentation.
okay, cool.
Same thing with that inner HTML that we used previously, right?
All right.
Okay. So this if statement that's brand new to us is being used to generate the text of our div down here. That's all we're doing. So what's the rest of all this stuff in here? Well, we're going to dump the text, whichever one it picks. We're going to dump it to the console log so we can see it in our web inspector. That's optional. It's not a requirement. It's just one of our output methods, right? I use it for debugging purposes. Then here,
So the method is inner HTML. Okay, that's a method. Okay. good.
okay, I think I verbally said something incorrect earlier, so let me go back and take note of what I did here. This text method or argument or parameter or whatever it's called of the greeting object, that's our speech synthesis. That's not our div down below. And I think I was saying it was the div down below and it was not. So I was misleading there. This is our text object, speech synthesis utters object, greeting. This is the text that we are changing for it to speak. We haven't done anything with our div down here yet. Sorry about that, folks. I was getting ahead of myself. This is where we set the inner HTML to that div. Richard nodding your head, yes. So I'm taking that. I'm doing okay
Yeah.
on that.
No, you're doing okay. Well, to be honest with you, I wasn't that far along because I was struggling with the stuff that was up above, but that's fine. I'm the kind of guy, I've kind of, a little bit of a learning disability, and I do this I'm the kind of guy that would take this training and go take this code and play with it over the course of an hour until I fundamentally really understood. Because what you're doing is you're specifying a variable and a method, and for me, that's kind of a new concept.
Yeah, new
right?
concept. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like really new concept.
Our last line of code here is what actually causes the greeting to be spoken with our speech synthesis object. So we're dumping it to the console log. We're changing our div on our web viewer, and we're going to speak it. So we go back here and hit run.
Not such a good day.
That was for 32. Now give me a number below 18.
11.
11. Hit run.
Good day.
Now you notice we did not refresh our web browser. We did not reinsert any HTML. We didn't reinsert our JavaScript. We simply used this run button, which is tied to this script, which takes the value of our text field, pops it into this variable called hour. Then we tell JavaScript to be ran inside of our web viewer, this function name, if else, and we pass that hour in as a parameter. So we can, once we have the code in our web viewer, we can rerun this
Good day.
as many times as we want, passing in different values. And we're not reloading any code. We're not refreshing a browser.
Not such a good day.
It's kind of synonymous with AJAX, right? Asynchronous changing of a web page without reloading everything from the server. You're just changing little snippets of data, which makes the web so much quicker and more efficient. And we can do a lot more things with it ever since they introduced that concept, right?
No, yeah, asynchronous. Yeah, and that's, yeah, we could get into that, but yes, very, very important. Yeah, I like the idea. So the code is in here. So basically we have this code that's in here, and it runs once, and then if we tell it to run again, we can tell it to pass in a variable and then run it again, but it's still sitting in here, right? So
let me correct one thing you said, which was we put the code in there and it runs once. It actually doesn't. It doesn't run at all, right? An anonymous function it would run immediately. But this is what gets loaded in the web viewer, and this is what sits in there the entire session until we get rid of it, right? So this just sits in there, including our function that's just sitting there quietly not doing anything. And our div is sitting in the body with an empty nothing in it, right? Until we run it for the first time. Then we change the contents of that div to not such a good day. And now it sits in there indefinitely. But if we rerun the same function again and right here change the inner HTML of that div to something else, it just changes that one item on the screen without
Right.
refreshing it. But this sits in there the entire time doing nothing. And our run button triggers this function every time we press it.
Okay, so that's what I want to specify here. That's kind of important, is that this code is loaded in here somewhat invisibly, right? But
Yep.
it's not in here continuously running and evaluating in a circle really fast. Right. It's just
sitting idle.
It's sitting idle, and for us to tell it to kind of like reactivate or reevaluate, we have to send it that instruction, and that's what that script step did.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's an important
And that's
concept, right?
Yeah. And that's what FileMaker just gave us recently with this perform JavaScript and web viewer script step. That's not very old. That's pretty new.
Yeah, it's pretty new.
And this is what's running that function inside that web viewer that's just sitting there idle. And this runs every time we tell it to run, which in this case, we have it tied to the run button, right? But this is the one magic script step that does that. It says in this web viewer, run this function that should be in there, or we're going to get an error, right? So this captures error if it's not there. Now, we showed this earlier. Let me show it again today. Let's wipe out this web viewer so that it's empty. I'll go into layout mode, back to browse mode. Now this this web viewer is empty, right? What happens now if we try to run that function in that web viewer?
Function doesn't.
We get an error, number 5. The function doesn't exist,
Okay.
right? So we hit init first. Now it's in there. Now we hit run.
Not such a good day.
Now we don't get an error, and we can run that as many
Not such
times
a good
as we want.
day.
And it just runs. I mean, that web viewer stays filled until we fill it with something else or move on to another record or something that FileMaker would clear the contents of the web viewer for us. Good stuff. But this is stuff that's not JavaScript, right? This is FileMaker's implementation of JavaScript. This would be confusing to a JavaScript developer that's never touched FileMaker. So in that regard, you guys have one up on those developers, right? Because you're FileMaker wizards. You understand this stuff.
Yeah.
Now you understand it a little bit more.
No, actually quite a bit more. This is great. Code to Go was in the Twitch side of things. She goes, Richard, the inner HTML is a property, not a method. If it's a method, it will have
Thank you.
a bracket or parentheses after the name. So
He just helped me with my terminology. Yes. I was struggling trying to think it's not a method, it's something else, and I couldn't think of what it was. Thank you. It's a property.
Yeah. And so for me, so you're getting your terminology straight. And for me, it's kind of a new concept, right?
Right.
It's basically a second word after the dot or period or whatever you want to call that. That's after the variable, I guess, name, right? And so for me, it's like, okay, what is that?
And
why is it important? And yeah.
And this may or may not add confusion to it, but it should elaborate on this definition thing. We were talking about an object, right? A speech object of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
It has properties and methods. A method would be a function that's tied to it that we could run.
Mm-hmm.
A property is a value stored
Yeah.
inside of it. So it's like an attribute. It's like your web inspector that has, whether it's bold or not, whether, what the curvature of the curved line is, that's an attribute. That would be synonymous with an object property. And a method would be a script tied to a run button, for instance.
Okay, so let me answer the question for David Angel. I mean, Kyle and I think Andy are going to try to answer it on Discord. This is kind of a fundamental, which is why I feel good about asking questions, because I know if I'm asking questions, other people are too. So just go to layout mode for me briefly, real quick, and I'll walk through this. So this is a web viewer, okay? When this web viewer, if you double click the object here, there's no code in here, okay? So this web viewer, now if we go back to browse mode and when it loads, there's nothing in here. It's totally empty. So this initialize right here is going to take a block of HTML or whatever, and it's going to load it into the web viewer right here. So we set it here. Yeah, right here. We set it to the variable, and then it goes into the web viewer. And so the idea is that you're saying it's once per layout. Well, it's really, I don't know, if you created another record and you flipped, because remember it's the web viewer. Yeah, I mean, if just for fun and giggles, put initialize in here for me. Just hit initialize and then hit run for me just once.
Not such a good day.
Now create a new record, just command in, create a new record. So this, now if we go backwards a record, go back the previous record.
If we hit run here, this one's empty.
It's empty,
Yeah.
but if we go back, that value's in there. So the web viewer is kind
Not
of
such a good day.
kind of like
And
a,
the JavaScript's still in there. Yeah. I
yeah,
was curious.
it's kind of like a field with a value in it, but if we close the file and reopen it, it'll be blown out and gone away. So that is web viewer, unless you tell it what to display, is going to be fundamentally blank. So the initialization is just loading like the base code in here. And then this tweaks the code. It causes it to do something after the fact. You could do it all in one script. There's no reason it has to be two scripts, but he's demonstrating.
Matter of fact, you can take the init code and have it on a on record load script trigger quietly in the background, no button, so that every time the page loads, the record loads, it just runs that init script and populates your web viewer every single time.
Yep. So so a web viewer is kind of if you think about it from the standpoint, it has data in it. It's kind of like a field, a local field, but it has the properties of a global in that it's not saved to the server and it's not preserved. And going to layout mode back to browse mode resets it, and closing the file and reopening the file resets it, right? So I've never thought about it this way. It's a really great question, David Angel. I mean, like really, really great question. And so, yeah, I think that's a fundamental here of understanding, what the web viewers do. I mean, for us, we always just kind of, understanding and programming is one thing, but to be able to teach this stuff, that's why Leland is so good. It's why I'm trying to learn this. I mean, I'm never going to be a JavaScript trainer, but, as a pilot, you can be a pilot, fly the airplane, don't crash it. To be an instructor pilot, you don't have to know it a little bit more. You have to be just about God to pull that off. Leland has to be really at a high level. Those of you who are also instructors here, I'm not talking down to anyone, but you have to be at a really high level to articulate this to people who don't fundamentally understand. And so that's kind of me. I'm the student in JavaScript, but I can tell you, going through and becoming an instructor on things, it's a tall wall to climb over. It's not just a little bit more knowledge. You have to really know it. And just now, for me thinking about the web viewer, trying to explain what it is, it's a weird object. It's part record and part kind of global field that doesn't exist, but it does exist, and it contains data uniquely for each record as you flip through it, right? So anyway, so yeah, sorry about that.
And everything you were struggling with to explain there, and when we had that additional record going back and forth, to me, that's context, right?
Yes, that's absolutely context. And then the thing is, with the web viewer, the context is kind of this, it's a little funky. And so, for example, if you have the web viewer and you're on this and you create a new, so do me a favor here. We have data right here. We're on record 1. If we go to a different layout, without going to layout mode, just like keep us in browse mode, go to somewhere else. Now, take us back that layout. Reset it. So even jumping off the layout resets it to 0, right? So it's really an interesting, it stays there as you flip through records, or if you flip through records and come back, but if you exit the window or exit the layout, do almost anything else, it resets to basically to empty, null, I guess, almost, right? So
Yeah. So what you were just saying, to put it down in words in a document, I would say that a web viewer on a layout has its own set of context rules.
Yes.
That differs from standard fields
From any other object in FileMaker, from any other object, I would say, because there's nothing else that behaves quite like this, I don't think.
There's a few gotchas. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, and David, that's why we have to set it initially, which is fundamental. But I always try to describe things like to compare it to something else, that helps people make the jump faster. And for me, it's like, now that I think about it like this.
Here's another good question on Discord.
Go ahead.
Why get as number for the parameter passed to the JavaScript function? Right
here. My if statement in JavaScript was, that's a very good question. It would be interesting to test that without. I'm using hours less than 18. I think I just contradicted myself. I said all parameters coming from FileMaker are always a string, right? I wonder if it actually can come through as a number. Right here, I'm trying to guarantee it, but that might not, because I'm passing it from FileMaker to JavaScript. That could convert it into a string. But yet when we ran it, it was treating it as a number inherently. I didn't specify it here. It was coming in here. I used it here and it worked. So it was not treating it as a string, I don't think. Wow, that's interesting. I might have contradicted myself.
Schmiegel ask a great question. We're back to kind of this fundamentals a little bit, and I think this is super valuable. So Schmiegel James says, why are we setting a web viewer in a script instead of just coding it onto the layout?
And you can, in our Hello World 1 through 7, we did that in number 1.
Okay,
So I wanted to show that is an option.
it does both. Why?
Yep.
I have an answer for this, but I want to see what you say. Why would you code it in a script as opposed to just setting the object on a layout?
Mostly because all the more advanced stuff that I do with JavaScript and FileMaker, I always do it in a script because there's a couple different reasons for that, but it's business decisions. It's not a requirement, but I tend to always do it by script. Number one, it's much easier to access and change. Number one, because I have scripts that do a lot of things that are all combined. Matter of fact, if you take a look at Pac-Man, it's a very, very busy script with lots of JavaScript and FileMaker integrated to do that. Plus, if you recall in this script here, we had some text substitution going on. Can't do that if it was static inside that web viewer.
Okay, so I know these are really great questions, and so we're going to keep going here. I'm going to come back to the progression of learning. This is Schmiegel and Larry and a bunch of you who are not like serious code people. So he said it the same way, but I'm going to give you more concrete. When you're learning FileMaker and you're this person over here, a new developer, you want it to just work and you don't really care how you got there, right? You might have a calculation that's in a calculated field. You might have some scripts. You might have a custom function with code there. And so what you end up having is bits of code because Claris FileMaker Incorporated, Claris International organically built this over the years. If you were going to rebuild this platform, this product, you would have a holistic way of coding it in an integrated interface where you're on the script workspace screen, but then you could just hit a tab at the button and it would show you the custom functions and then show you the field definitions. Instead, you have to close the window, go to a different area, go into that area. The interface works different. And so as a developer, you're just happy it works. Then for performance reasons and other issues, you start to isolate and bring all your code into just the scripts, because that way you can go to one location and change everything within the solution. That's why I get away from calculation fields if I can, right? There'll be times when maybe there's a performance benefit if you watch Nick and you see something there, but as a general rule, I try to put everything into scripts because it's simple. I don't have to jump going everywhere. Oh, custom function. No, it's a defined field under this table. Which table? I don't know. But if you stay in script workspace and you make the code change, then you run it, because you can actually keep the script workspace open and run the code at the same time, right? So the idea is that as a professional developer, or say you're not an amateur developer, but you're trying to be speed, keep the script workspace open, make a code change, run it, make a code change, run it. You can't do that with custom function. And field definitions. If you go into field definitions, you can't run right at the same time. It's like all or nothing. And then you hit OK, and it's going to rethink about it and checking all the layouts and all the. We are where we are because the platform is very popular and it works really well, but it's clearly been duct taped together and glued together organically for 35 years by hundreds and hundreds of engineers. And it reflects that. So the developers, us, we have to adapt to the duct tape and glue sometimes, and we end up, for better or worse, sticking all the code in one spot. It makes our work faster. So it's only a streamlining expediency thing, right? And another area is code on an object on a layout mode. Go to layout mode and the code's buried in a web viewer object. Another location for little nuggets of code to be buried all over. It's like if you have a litter box, every day I have to clean the litter box. I got my rescue cats. You look at the litter box. Hey, there's nothing under that litter box. Oh yeah, there's little bits of nuggets of code all underneath the surface. You got to get in there and paw that code out and change it. It's the litter box of code, right? If you could put it all in one spot, it just makes your life easier. So I killed that, but it's an important concept. It's also why FileMaker is popular, why they're profitable. But at the same time, we have this like legacy environment that we work with, right? So
Just to capitalize and add to what you were just saying, it also makes your code very reusable, right? You can copy and paste script code a lot quicker than and easier than copying and moving web viewers around.
so I spent a lot of time with that. 5 minutes, but yeah, it's an important concept, and the reason it's important because I talked about it before, and I want to remind the viewers that watch us all the time how we got to where we got, and why it's not necessarily a bad thing. It just is the product of a mature product that kicks is very popular. But then there's certain kind of junky things that should be cleaned up that have never been cleaned up because no one was paid to do it.
To kind of continue on the same thread, what I'm trying to really focus on here is the JavaScript code. Day one, when we did Hello World 7 different ways, that was an attempt to show you that a lot of ways that we use JavaScript can be done differently. You can and that's what we've been talking about. You can store it in a web viewer. You can store it in a script. Over here on the right-hand side, I've got 4 steps to take to replicate the exact way that I'm doing it here. But again, this could be done a different way. And I think that's what I'm seeing a lot of with comments on Discord and a few other places. Yes, there's many ways that we could handle the code from init to run. These do not have to be in buttons. But if you look at just the scripts that I've supplied that have just the JavaScript and HTML in it, you can take this and use it a myriad of different ways to accomplish the exact same thing, right? So FileMaker usually gives us 5 to a dozen ways to do the exact same thing. And this is just another prime example of it, I think.
I agree. Keep trucking.
Okay, next up, our switch statement. This should look kind of familiar to you. Let me kind of zoom in on this a little bit. You've probably seen this before. A case statement in FileMaker. What does it allow you to do? It's kind of like, in this case, it's kind of like 6 or 7 if statements all sequentially, right? Yeah. And there's a gotcha with a case statement, and that is if down here you put if hour equals 10, then have it say, I'm done, it'll never happen. Why? Because a case statement only is triggered and ran by its very first statement that was true. So the first thing that it finds that's true, it does, and then it ignores everything else. This trailing one down here at the bottom is your default, and that's what happens if none of these comparisons are actually, what's the word? Compared to result in true. If none of these result to be true, then it runs this last default statement. Totally understandable?
Yep.
We have the same thing in JavaScript, but it's called a case statement. It looks a little different, and there's a few extra bits of pieces to pay attention to.
It's a switch statement.
Switch. Here's the exact same code, but using JavaScript with a switch statement. Now, here's something kind of interesting. Which one looks more efficient? In this case, FileMaker wins. Good job, guys. There is one little gotcha, which is in a switch statement, whenever something is true, you can do more than one thing. So because of that, at the end of what you want it to do, you have to use the word break, the keyword break. So you'll notice after every case in here, we have some code of what it'll do if it's true. And then finally, it ends with a break and then goes on. But if we take a look at, let's zoom in a little bit now that we've seen the whole thing. So this is taking in the hour variable, which as you can see here in FileMaker, we have to say hour equals 10, hour equals 11, hour equals 12. In this case, we have to put hour in at the beginning, and then our values are each individual case, case 10, case 11, case 12, case 13. So it certainly looks a lot different, right? Plus, something you can do in FileMaker that you can't do in the switch statement in JavaScript is you don't have to use the same variable here, right? You could say if hour equals 10, do something. If minute equals 2, do something. If second equals 30, do something. Can't do that in a switch statement. You can only compare one variable. So that's why I've done that here in this FileMaker example, is I'm trying to make both of these do the exact same thing, which they are. So again, this greeting equals tea time with a semicolon is just one line of code to run if hour equals 10. But I could have more than one separating them by semicolons, finally ending with a break. Okay. And just like FileMaker, there's a default at the bottom, but it actually uses the word default with something to do and a break. And of course, you can leave any of these blank or missing entirely. You could do this entire case statement and just do a case 12, and you could ignore the other numbers. And then the default would happen, right? Because if case was actually 13, which you didn't specify, the default value would run. And you can leave the default blank if you wish. So you can have it do nothing if it's false. So with that, is there any questions pouring in before we start to look at buttons and scripts and actually using this?
Nope.
I think it's kind of straightforward,
No.
but I'm used to it. So we'll run it past Richard, which is our self-proclaimed non-JavaScript expert. What do you think? Does that kind of make sense to you without explaining
No,
any
yeah,
further?
it's fine. It just the brakes cause it to exit out and then down, right?
Uh-huh.
What we're saying.
Yeah.
So if it trips there, it does that. Okay.
So our init button is just like before. It's going to set HTML down in our web viewer down here, and our run button is going to run a function. So let's go look at those scripts. Here's our switch. Here's our code. Here's our JavaScript. And I'm going to make the window a little bigger because, wow, we got a bigger JavaScript function this time. And it's right here. Everything else outside of that is boilerplate, same as you've seen before.
Okay.
And really the reason why this looks so large is because this switch statement is rather large and we're checking for 5 different values plus a default, right? 6 different values. Down at the end, we're doing the same thing that we did before. We're dumping the greeting to the console log. We're changing the inner HTML of our div down in our body, and we're actually speaking out the greeting. So all of this stuff is identical to everything we did before in the if statement, right? Nothing changed there. This is our only change. And we're using an if, instead of using if then else like we did previously, we're using our switch statement. And we're checking for a few bit more options rather than just less than 18. So now that you know what it does, let's go play. We hit an it that fills in our web viewer down here with code. And give me a number, Richard, between 0 and 20.
Let's try 17. Let's try a trick one here at the beginning. Let's see what happens.
I'm famished.
Okay.
So that triggered the default setting, right?
Yeah, all the way to the bottom.
And you can see why it didn't match 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, or 15.
All right, so let's become
Another
a
number.
hobbit. We're a hobbit, and we're going to be 11. Second breakfast, right? So, yeah.
My favorite one.
Yeah.
Second breakfast.
Absolutely. So this totally makes sense, right? If we put in something like 2, it's not a less than 18 like it was last time.
I'm famished.
So it still triggers the default because
Mhm.
we're not comparing anything with less than, greater than, equal. We're just,
Okay.
it's either 10 through 15 or it's default, right? Pretty straightforward.
Okay.
Think we're done there. Think that explains our switch statement.
Yep.
For next loop, here's what it looks like in FileMaker. You don't call it that. You just call it a loop. But what is it we do here? We're setting a variable, which is technically called an index. And by the way, I never write code like this. I always use $index because I like to have everything self-code documented.
Yes.
I means nothing to no one. I was just looking at some code that FileMaker experts were passing along to each other yesterday in an email chain. I was so exasperated because they had cryptic code like this. And I just kind of wonder if they're patting themselves on the back because they look like brilliant computer science experts if they do that.
They're not instructors. If they were instructors,
No, and maybe
know
that's why. Yeah, because you
if
can't.
they
Absolutely.
deal with normal humans, right? The normal human goes, bah! Right? And so you gotta, yeah. So, sorry.
Frustrating point for me, you can kind of tell. Okay, so inside of our loop, we set a variable called greeting. We take that I index and we concatenate a string with a comma and a space. Then we set a variable, oh, look, here's our index incrementer, right? That's what we're doing. We're taking I and we're making I plus 1. In JavaScript, we could say I plus plus. Kind of cool. Then we exit our loop if our index is greater than counter, which we didn't actually define right here, but you get the idea. We have a max value. We want to exit if it's greater than. We don't want to run. This would, without defining counter up here in FileMaker, you'd have an indefinite loop, right? It would just run forever. Force quit. So here's what it looks like in JavaScript. Oops, JavaScript wins as far as a little bit more efficient. They lost on the switch statement for sure. JavaScript wins for, let me zoom in just a little bit here and try to see both. There we go. So this is what's called a for next loop in JavaScript. It's very common in other languages as well. And we set our I index here. This is going to start at 0, just like we did in FileMaker. And we separate, this takes 3 parameters, right? Here's the first one, semicolon separates it, just like it does in FileMaker's calc engine for functions. And our second parameter and our third parameter. Our first one sets our initial I value, just like we did here. The middle is our exit strategy. That is, as long as I is less than counter, run this loop. As soon as this results to false, it will stop. So that's our exit loop function right there.
Okay.
And our I++ is doing the same thing as this line right here, which is I equals I plus 1. It increments I by 1. So we start at 0, goes to 1, goes to 2 until we hit counter. What are we doing in this loop? We're taking the text. Ooh, what did we call it before? Start with a P. Property. We're taking the property text of our object greeting, and we are concatenating to it I plus a comma and a space. So we're taking text and adding our increment variable in there. That's kind of interesting. Plus a comma and a space.
Hey, wait. So
Go
we're
ahead.
this is a number. So we're going, it's 1, then 2, then 3, then 4. But you're saying it's text, not a.
So text is taking whatever is in there previously, adding an I to it, and then adding a string to it. So you're right, we're adding a number and then a string. So I think JavaScript's just going to quietly insert this number into our string. So it's going to convert it into a string, whatever the value of I is.
Okay.
And that's with the plus signs, those are concatenating, right? So in
they're-
FileMaker, these two plus signs would be ampersands, right?
Yeah, they're okay. Yeah.
So this would be safe in FileMaker. FileMaker would add an I and it would treat it as a string, but so does JavaScript. So with that, let's go look at our code. We still have our init button, a run button, and a text field sitting right here. And our for next loop, here's our code, a little bit shorter this time. Here's our script. And again, the same 3 lines at the bottom for our output, our same 3 lines at the top, which is defining our variables. This is the only thing that changed from a very large switch statement to a for loop with the exact same code we just saw. So with that, let's go see how it operates. This is going to be our max, by the way. This is our counter variable. So what do you want as a max counter? Something less than 20.
Yeah, like 5 or something.
5. Okay. So we will init our web viewer. Now we have a value. We have 5 in our text field. Let's run it.
0, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So there's our for loop. It ran 5 times, starting with 0, ending at 4, and it concatenated the existing greeting with a number plus a comma space. So our greeting text started off blank, empty, not null, undefined maybe, empty string.
Okay, I have a question.
Go ahead.
This is kind of like a bit of code that executes, right? Like you can see it kind of going and, rotating, and you can insert other things in here. Like I could put a pause of like 1 second in here or something like that.
Yep.
You're doing,
Yeah.
but over here, I don't really, it's the way it's mashed together, and I'm just not used to seeing it this way. Could you insert a pause in here? Like count down 10, 9, 8. I mean, we're going up, that's fine. But could you, because this was going as fast as it could, and then it finished, right?
Right. And the slowest portion, if you noticed, was the speech.
By far.
It printed to the screen a lot faster than it was
Oh,
able
yeah.
to speak it, right?
Yeah.
So let's change this to, I don't know, 10 and rerun it.
0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Now you notice in the speech, the comma acted as a slight pause in the speech. That's kind of built into general text-to-speech functionality, right?
Yeah.
That's been in there a long time. So if we stripped it, and that's the reason why I put commas in there, was not only visual, but it helped the speech slow down. In other words, he would have said it really fast. 1, 2, 3, eyes, yeah, kind of slurred it together.
So
now, as far as slowing
but they're displaying it asynchronously. Like it rips this out first, and this one is slowly catching, or not this one, but the text. I don't know,
Right.
a speaker here, and the speaker has sounds coming out. They're going at different speeds, right? So,
Now you notice while he was speaking, our mouse did not turn into some sort of pause or spinning beach ball or something, because JavaScript is asynchronous. That speak capability was actually going on asynchronously, and it did not lock up the user in FileMaker or in JavaScript the rest
that's
of the
a
code.
big deal. That's a nice thing.
That's a big deal. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, has FileMaker done that with media content? Can you have a web browser media display playing a sound and not lock up the user while it's playing? Is that asynchronous? I haven't done that for so long. I have no idea.
It never works the way you think it should. right? You
Yeah,
always find your-
media in a container.
Yeah, and it's like, and then it behaves differently in Go. So, yeah, I don't have the answer to that right now. I haven't done that probably in 6 or 8 months. And when I did it, every time I do it, it frustrates me. I just want to play like a little cute little sound or something in it. You have to like damn near give blood and kill a unicorn to get it to do it. So,
We've got 3 more minor sections left, but we're already at 90 minutes. What's your thought?
yeah, we probably need to pull the plug on it. And it's all because some of you people in Discord asked really great questions, and suddenly you're off in the weeds answering important questions like why is the code all in scripts and what is the benefit? And that's a hugely important conversation that I don't think we should necessarily skip. So anyway, Kyle
Agreed.
Williams has been here chiming in a lot. I appreciate the help. Code to Go. A bunch of you are Andy and John from RCC. A bunch of you have been throwing some questions and answers in here, keeping it good, keeping it real, as we say. I'm just struggling to keep up with this because in my mind, that looks like looks like my cat walked on the keyboard over here. This is a little more, and it's kind of like, I guess, why I like FileMaker a little bit, right? It's a little bit more, I don't want to say human readable, but it kind of almost is. So yeah. So anyway, but I'm not, it's just comfort level, right? Like if I flew a bunch of you in a helicopter to go drive the helicopter, you'd be like, oh, what the hell? And so it's just what you're used to. So, all right.
But what's funny is that if you take a non-FileMaker person and you show them that FileMaker script engine version up there, they're going to say, oh, I understand that JavaScript version so much better.
Oh, I'm sure. All right. Well, cool. Well, tomorrow we're going to pick up day 4 or the last day of the week here, and we're going to try to hopefully not have any really good questions. So Andy, no good questions tomorrow. Peter Gaines, absolutely no quality questions whatsoever. I don't want any good questions because then that means tomorrow's going to be like a 2-hour ordeal. Anyway, so yeah, we should be getting recordings. I'll get an update to you folks tomorrow on where we're at with that.
I think we covered it well. Yeah, we got quite a bit to try to cram in tomorrow. So I have one question for you. With what you saw on my screen last, where I show the FileMaker version of the exact same thing as the JavaScript version.
I like
to
that.
me, I think that's instrumental in our audience. Do you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's huge. That's what you're not going to see with W3 schools, right? So
Exactly.
that's why you're the high quality professor that makes it easy to understand. We love that.
I will take my bow. Thank you.
All right, very good. See ya. Got a report of an individual up here who may be a FileMaker license. Well, it's potentially expired. Look at the back of that car right there. Looks like the FileMaker license has expired. Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle. Sir, step out of the vehicle. Sir.